Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, it definitely works. So, do you want it here? Or okay, like here? Okay, cool. Hi. Um, somehow I ran out of conversation. Does it work? Okay, cool. Okay. Hey. Hey. Hello. Hello.
and welcome to Go to 10's live stream. Today Trish is going to talk about the importance of social sciences whilst developing social robots. Yeah. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand or write in the chat, and I will bring them up in the ending of the presentation. Yeah, thank you, and good luck.
There you go. We have amazing technology here. So hello everyone, thank you for being here today. So I'm going to talk to you about social robots and social sciences. And I think it's a great thing to do personally, partly because I work in it, but also because when you type in social sciences, this is what you get. You get two men speaking. I think one might be a little bit more idiotic than the other, basing it on the books. Two men having a conversation, people having a great time over here just discussing things quite random. Apparently this is what social science is. And then these are social robots. So two little buddies having a great time as well. And I think that these two pictures are actually really not representative of either things, actually. Because I have never seen two social robots being together unless they were in a closet, locked up, switched off. So just to tell you that a social robot is to be around humans, usually one by one. And social sciences is about discussing ideas around society. So the very meaning of social there is very different from the get-go, because here it's about society, and for social robots it's about interacting with humans. So before I get into this, I thought I would talk a little bit about who I am and why I believe to be an expert in this area. So I started off doing law, where it was all about what's right, what's wrong, and I became a bit of an anarchist to lawyers because I did sociology of law, where it was more about who is this right for if there is a law, and when there isn't a law, what actually happens. So then this brought me on to look at more onto artificial intelligence and questions surrounding what norms are we actually producing, what are we actually reflecting when we're creating artificial intelligence. So then this led me to be a project assistant and a PhD student for Stefan Larsson. And in the midst of this, I also wanted to demystify artificial intelligence in the social sciences. So I began a student organization called headway. So that's cool too. So if you're interested, I welcome you to look into this. So now a little bit more about social robots. So for me, they are so intriguing from a normative perspective. So from a legal perspective, there's not many standards telling you how social robots should look like, what should you even incorporate, should they look human, should they not? I mean, there's standards saying, try not to make them look too humans, but it doesn't really help you. So I thought I would show you what can look like social robots. So this here is Fairhat, and they're actually a Swedish company. And this is Pepper, who I think it was originally started in France, but now more in Japan. So if you've been to Japan, you might have seen Pepper. And so essentially, they're both connected to the internet, so very much Internet of Things. They have sensors here and here, but Pepper, because Pepper is mobile, it can actually walk around. So it also has cameras behind. And so what's interesting, so Fairhat is just a head. So it's immobile, but it will nod, it will act like a human in that sense. And it looks quite human because it's a projected face. Whereas Pepper is a little bit less human-like, yet it has more human-like characteristics because it has arms that can actually move, and it can move around. It can nod as well, and the eyes are very cute. They can like move and stuff. And then this is a screen on Pepper, and so it's very much used for example, for rehabilitation, like, okay, now you need to do star jumps, and so you can show it either or on its little screen and be like, keep going. Whilst Fairhat, for example, can do interviews or just have more communication stuff like, oh, where can I find this train? And then, yeah, so they have similar but different roles in different situations because of this mobility, for example. So then this brings us on to the role of the developer. When and why should the developer use either of these robots? So you would hope it would be because of the following. So essentially, these are developers. This is me. I should only be half or even non-existent because social scientists aren't really part of the roboticists yet, but bear with me. So what you want ideally is society. So they is reflected in the data set. You want unanimously society to be reflected. And then you want the roboticists to look at this mirror and try and reflect it in their robots. And we're there being like, good, that's great. And technically, you would hope that is what they're doing because they're collecting data. They're sort of ninjas. They're programmers. They're really good at making sense of the data that they get. But truthfully, this is more what happens. They are actually not really understanding what society needs. They're looking at it from their own perspective. Where should a social robot go? Why? According to me. What do I think that these people need me to do? Which is highly problematic because then they're just viewing society as a sideline thing, but then so they still look at it for some inspiration, but then they also understand it through their own lenses when creating. So then this leads me to look into them only and being like, what are you doing? So, but to me, although I'm making it sound like it's problematic, is it really? Because as developers, they need to innovate. They need to create something that society might need in the future. So is it really for them to have to make these normative decisions, to decide what is wrong, what is right for people, to say who is it for, why is it for them? I think no, and it enables me to have a job, so that's great. But I thought I would also show you that it is really possible to collaborate. It is possible to share a language, a common language together. Here, we were trying to make a Ferhat robot. We were trying to understand how to create it in order to screen for peripartum depression. So peripartum depression is a depression that can occur any time from conception up to 1 to 2 years after the pregnancy. So it's a very, very tricky and sensitive area. So it wasn't just about how do you put the robot into the general practitioners and then people just go and talk to it. It was more like, what norms do we need to understand? What's fair? How do we conceptualize gender in this? And just kind of conceptualize as well the medical aspect of it. And how do you reflect this into the robot? So you can see us here we're trying to program literally what the robot should say, oh, okay, when we go into the room, and the person sits down, this is how it should begin, how do you make it not so uncanny valley, where it just switches up as soon as you enter the room, and that's a little bit, or just all these ideas. And then we ended up using so we ended up doing a very roboticist thing in a very social scientist way, where we needed to create a scenario, but then with me in it and Stefan, we were able to be a little bit more creative and add some norms that we knew we were looking for, and then create the robot according to this vignette, where we wanted a literal interaction between the robot and the human. And so for that, I became the robot. So I would say stuff, and then you got to transpose it onto Ferhat, and then you got to choose different faces. It's such amazing technology, to be honest. I don't really understand how it works, and I didn't need to. But yeah, and it was really cool because they could take care of that, and then we could be there actually, hang on a minute, should we really have a robot in this setting? Depression can only be diagnosed by doctors. Should a robot really enter such a field? it's super political. Who is it that's the user? So it's all these questions that social sciences kind of tease out for roboticists because they don't have the skill, nor should they have the skill to do so. So this was a very brief introduction to what I do. I realize I went way faster than what I said I would. So now we're 10 minutes in, and I'm kind of telling you about takeaways now. So what I want you to take away from social robots is very much that they are not as scary. I think a lot of people think of robots as things that are going to take our life over. Right now, if you just take the plug out, chances are, if you just unplug the Wi-Fi, the robot is not going to take the world. And they're very much still being programmed. They're still very much at a research stage. They're not so much in the wild, as roboticists call it, so you don't see them. I mean, even here, people watching online might not see it, but there's a robot where you tap your card in, and it's just there. It can't do much else. And so I think that we've really fantasized about this idea of robots, which is great for roboticists because they get a lot of funding, but it's not so good for acceptability. How do we actually make people accept this robot and think that it's a bit more idiotic than what it is? Because truthfully, that's what AI is right now. It's not, and like in this instance right now, the robot recognizes someone and it can wave, and then it's like, hi. You know, it doesn't go, so today I had an existential crisis. What about you? You know, I think there's still a lot to do and a lot to go. However, social robots hold many possibilities for helping society. For example, myself as a researcher, I'm trying to understand how we can use robots to help with informal care right now. So, for example, how can we be there for the carers as well as the person with disabilities, so that they can actually have support in what they do, and it's much more of a collaboration. But that's amazing. It's amazing that they can do that. And I think that the carer would still provide a lot of the humane care, like having to wash someone or make sure to change the bed. The robots can't do that right now, but it can still be there as a companion, for example, or as or just to remind people what to do in a non-Big Brother way, or just be there for some sort of support, like, yeah, now you need to take your medication. So that's really great. And then with regards to roboticists, I just want to say that although I'm quite critical of them, I'm very much pro them. I'm not at all against what they do. I think it's amazing. I am against how lawyers and maybe a lot of social scientists view the roles of roboticists, that somehow they should hold all the answers as to how society should look like and what they should reflect. And I really do not believe that that is their role. They are there to innovate and create, and we are there to support it. At least that's my hope. And so that's what I'd like to say about social scientists. However, for all of these like synergies to work in a sense, it's society that brings everyone together, and it's very much how do we bring society into the conversation when right now, for example, it's very unequal. The internet itself, I think at one point there was more pictures of George W. Bush than Latino women on the internet. So I think we need to somehow also understand that the databases don't reflect necessarily what we need them to reflect. And yeah, that kind of goes against the GDPR, the personal data, because actually we do need to understand a lot of humans' behaviors and understand how to research that in a very ethical way, but somehow the law is also there, and it somehow impedes on this kind of creation in Europe. But yeah, so I think that this is what we could do. And if you have any thoughts on it, I would love to hear them. And yeah, otherwise, thank you so much for listening. I took a picture of me, and this is Nao. It's actually Pepper's brother or sister, sibling. Very cute. It was the first one. And yeah, if you want to contact me, that's my email address. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
I think it's super interesting, and I really think we need the human part of the robotics and the technology that we're building. And I love the combination of the more technology advanced we become, the more philosophical and spiritual we become also. I'm just curious on your reflections on like, obviously there's like a reality of humanity today, and then there's like an ideal world that we want to live in.
Yeah.
And like we're building robots based on the data of reality, like how humanity is looking now. But how can we build robots for the ideal world that we want to live in, that is more compassionate and patient and accepting of differences and things like that?
Yeah, that's the $1,000,000 question, to be honest. Great question. I think what I would say, first of all, is so I observe a lot of roboticists, and so I really enjoy seeing how they do things. And so, for example, I'm just going to take this one. They were looking at robots as romantic partners, and they really wanted to know how that would impact the other partner. So let's say a heterosexual relationship, so a man, a woman, and a robot. And they really wanted to see how would, for example, the woman react if the man goes to a restaurant with this robot. And I was just like, but this is quite an interesting question, because the only food, if you want, that the robot needs is electricity. So like, what way are you going to go? Like a drive-through of electricity? Like, it's a bit... I just thought sometimes the questions that they ask maybe don't get to what they need to know. So that's something that, to me, that's why I'm like, what are they reflecting? I think they're reflecting something that they want to know about themselves almost, and not so much about society as a whole. So to me, the first thing is that they need to involve a lot more people in their studies. In order to kind of see what needs to be done. I think something else where social science helps, I hope, is that it needs to be very context-specific and very country-specific. Like what works in France does not work in Sweden, for example. And you need a lot of data that's representative. I think Furhat or another company works a lot with creating animated faces, and they base it on Disney's. And it's like, yeah, but Disney's are really emotive. Some people aren't so emotive. I might not be one of them, but yeah. So I think that there's a lot, luckily, there's a lot of steps before even understanding how we get to this higher ground of like, what is it that we want to reflect in the first place? I think these are very normative questions that belong more to like the elected people, like the very democratic way of doing it. So to say what society wants, but for me, for them to know how to do that, I think they actually need to be educated on robots. They can't just go, oh, so it's like iRobot or like Transformers, and it's like neither of those things actually. So I think that there's a need for lawyers, for politicians, for people across society to gain an understanding, first and foremost, to then be able for roboticists to attempt to understand how this ideal world exists in that context and in that country. Yeah. Well.
I don't know how to formulate that. Yeah, I think there's something in social robots and the authenticity, even though we know it's a synthetic relation that you have, and the response and report that you have, for example, in the postpartum depression meeting. Like, how can you create something that feels authentic enough for me to trust it.
Yeah.
Even though I know it's synthetic.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a question, but just something I reflected upon here as well. How can I interact with something that is synthetic, but still evoke something in me that can help the robot help me?
Yeah,
you could say like.
Yeah, absolutely. So really cool, a really good question. I think, to be honest, we just look at our phones. I don't know about you, but you say like your biggest news and your saddest news and your happiest news, I meant not biggest, on your phone. You somehow like are very okay to say it. And there's a lot of research from dating from so long ago about how people are actually very open to talking to robots, and they're very much more open to talk to machines rather than humans about their problem. So that's what's interesting, is that we know that if you just start asking questions, a robot or a machine of some sort, then people are quite likely to be very open about it. So we don't know, because we didn't try it out, because it would need to go through so much more to see how it could screen for peripartum depression. But the chances are the people would be much more open to talk about how they're feeling, have a lot more time, because there's no time constraint with a robot, and they can just listen, and they can decide if they follow a tree. So for peripartum depression, you have two types of questionnaires. Unfortunately, they're the same as the one for major depressive disorder. And the reason why I say unfortunately is because it means that you have questions such as, have you put on weight in the last 3 weeks? Or how is your sleep in the last 3 weeks? Which don't really seem to be like adequate for this environment. But aside from that, so it means that then the robot is very attentive to be able to pick up on things, to know what next questions to ask, in a sense. So about acceptability, there's some research to suggest that it would be very beneficial to them, which is why we wanted to look into how to create this robot in the first place. Yeah. Cool. But are you interested in social do you work with social robots, or?
No, I'm more in like the culture sector.
Ah.
Somewhere
Yeah.
so much to do in the social sciences and the human and culture
Yeah.
side to it. That's not super interesting, because it's not necessarily about the technology, but it's about the human part.
Yeah. This is what we found was like, although we needed to learn a lot about the robot, we ended up learning so much more about peripartum depression, about the way the experts, because we interviewed gender study experts, but also peripartum depression experts, and because we put a robot in front of them, they were very much like, because actually you find that or actually, and it was just so interesting. I think because also Sweden's quite an individualistic society, so for them it would be quite normal, for example, for the woman to go to the screening alone, whereas for some other cultures that might not be okay. They might want more people in the room, and how does the robot accommodate for such things? It's just, and the language and just everything. And it was really interesting to hear them say this, because we were like, well, that's technically not so much part of our study, but it's really interesting findings about how the whole environment, like the whole ecosystem, in a sense, works. So
it's like staging an experience or a journey, right?
Yeah.
It's like staging an experience or a journey and then prototyping it. So it's almost like you could even put a rock there and see what happens when you sit and talk to it.
Yeah.
I don't know. As you say, people are so individualistic in Sweden, then maybe what people just need is a breathing space, or a space to just talk, or like have someone to listen.
Yeah.
And then things will unfold itself or something.
Yeah, that was actually one of our conclusions for the peripartum depression paper, was very much hang on. like, do we really want to put it in healthcare? Because if we put it outside of healthcare, it means that they can look for things. Maybe the woman is about to be evicted, or maybe something with a partner is really bad. And then the robots can just be like, okay, these are the services, or this is what, like, 10 steps to do. Or, you know, like, you can do a breathing exercise with me and keep doing it every day. Just, yeah, but putting it in the medical setting is so much more serious. And it's like, no, they're only there to be screened for a very specific potential illness. So yeah, I agree. I think maybe they need a breathing space, but also I think peripartum depression isn't normalized enough. And this is what the doctors were telling us. They were like, we spend most of that meeting normalizing peripartum depression, and we have to be like, this is what it means. You know, you became diabetic whilst you were pregnant. That wasn't your fault. You understand that. Can you understand how this is also not your fault? And, you know, a lot of women be like, no, we don't. So that was their experience of it. So it was like, how can the robot, like, that would be the robot's primary role, actually, would be to normalize it before it's screened. So I think that it's so interesting to, yeah, like you said, to see what's actually needed and where do you put the robots. And I think that these types of questions, where do you even put the robot in the first place, is really interesting. That's something we're trying to understand for robots in caring, in the care setting. Yeah, in the setting of care. Yeah, but very nice. Sorry, yeah, I'm So when I did the peripartum depression, I was a project assistant, and now I'm a PhD student. So yeah, the project assistant was helping with a few things, including this pilot study, and now we're just delving into a lot more on carers, informal care, and I just started, so we're very new into this field of navigation. So yeah, it's more us trying to understand what it is.
More a reflection. Or I want to, because when you mention a rock, that's something I've been. How do you define social robots? Is basically the question. Because I think that sometimes there are clear examples with the pepper robot, and we would all agree, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
But then there are boundary cases. That's where the tricky part is. When does a rock become a robot? you know, sometimes you give like movement.
Yeah.
It clearly doesn't have to be humanoid or android. It can be a cat, right? Or something that looks like a dog and it can move. Then we think of it as a robot, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are also other stuff that doesn't move, have some other abilities. And we talk about Alexas. They are sort of have elements of robotics in a sense, right?
Yeah.
Or like the cognitive abilities. But because how would you define, or do you think of that question, or would you say that it's like a moving boundary, depending on where robotics is heading?
Yeah, great question, great reflection. Thank you so much. So no, I think, I don't know, because I was talking to somebody who was looking at putting Furhat into elderly care as a companion to speak to. And so they did a quick pilot study. Okay, like, let's just see how old people interact with this robot. And they were all like, what the hell? Why we talk? So Furhat, to put it into, is this. And they were just like, what's the difference between this and Alexa, except this thing looks at you, and so they got a bit creeped out by it. And so I don't know, I do wonder, because for me, what makes a social robot is that it also has a personality of its own. I think that that's somewhat quite important. But Furhat, it doesn't come across as much unless you have like a very specific projected face. But then for each projected face comes a different identity. Like, you can have this face with my voice, or this face with your voice. So it automatically seems to change personality from that perspective. Whereas Alexa, it can only be Alexa. So for me, that's something that's important to me in the way I look at social robots, because if I can make it like that, then I've delimited it for myself. But truth be told, I think, I don't know, it feels like, you know, even those automatic hoovers. People seem to put a personality to those. They tend to name them. They tend to give it a little character. So maybe from that definition, then they become a social robot as well. So I think it's really hard to define, and yeah, but I tend to for showing that I know what I'm doing, say that they come with, they embody something through human cues that we can recognize. And I think even that, like, because you can get a cat robot or like I don't know, different forms of animals, and even those, they can like nod, for example, or they do something that's humanly recognizable to us. It's like anthropomorphized to some extent. Yeah.
And it's very, I mean, it's not doing much. Personality
Yeah.
You get a feeling that it's something that mimics life in a sense.
Yeah.
Because if it is positive, it would be puppet.
Yeah.
In life, it's puppet.
Yeah.
It can be.
But I think, don't they really appreciate this little seal?
Yeah, well, there are at least studies on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't it that they have a cat as well? I think in Sweden, I think they use a cat
Yeah,
or
that's right.
something.
In schools.
Or the elder care. And it's very appreciated by my grandma works with elder care. So I think she told me, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that it's very appreciated.
Yeah, and I think that's really because it's because if it's a animal noid, is that what you're meant to can call them? All right, let's just go with that for now. But I think people are much more like, oh, okay, it's just a cute thing that I can hang out with, which is what you want these two to also become in a sense, because people are, wow, I can ask it loads of really cool questions. But the truth is you can't. But yeah, and then you see like a true collaboration between things, like between the carer and the cat, between the elderly person and the cat, and yeah, and then the elderly. So I think there's the triangle that ideally we'd achieve with those, with robots, with people, how they communicate to robots. But yeah, I think. Oh, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for your question.